Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the apparent confusion that Boris Johnson is claiming to have over issues with checks at the border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and how the EU as a result have had to thoughtfully draw him a diagram to help him out. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, in terms of what Boris Johnson had to do to get this withdrawal agreement through and to trigger Brexit later this week, is he needed to change Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. So apparently, according to the hardline Brexiteers, Theresa May's withdrawal agreement represented something that was much worse than even leaving the EU. It became known as Brexit in name only. And Boris Johnson's deal, oh, this is fantastic, this is excellent. So what Boris Johnson did to change it was to lock Northern Ireland permanently into a customs arrangement with the rest of the EU, Republic of Ireland most specifically, to maintain the frictionless movement across the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And he shifted that border, of course, between Northern Ireland and the rest of UK, Great Britain. And so that means there's potentially going to be different arrangements there. And the thing is that this idea is what the EU originally suggested. You know, they foresaw all sorts of problems with what ended up being termed the backstop. And they said, well, isn't it going to be simpler just to have Northern Ireland locked into this system and then the rest of Great Britain do what it wants? And Theresa May, no. Of course, she had to do that because she had weakened herself with an ill-advised general election, and she needed the DUP support, which is a unionist party in Northern Ireland, who would absolutely not get on board with this deal, and indeed have not. It's just that Boris Johnson no longer needs their support. Now, what that means is Northern Ireland permanently in the EU customs arrangements, Great Britain not, we can diverge from them. Tiny little problem with that. That means you're going to have two regions with different customs arrangements. That means border checks. That just means border checks wherever that exists in the whole world. And the issue there is Boris Johnson kept denying that there would be, he said there would be no need for any checks at that border up the Irish Sea. But this is not true. And at least one way, if Boris Johnson doesn't want to institute checks on goods going from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, in theory he could do that. In practice he's not going to be able to. I'll go over that in a minute. In theory he could do that, but there definitely needs to be checks of goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, because goods in Northern Ireland can pass freely into the EU. Well, the EU need to be able to control the goods that are coming in. So any goods that are considered at risk of entering the Republic of Ireland will be subject to checks. If it's goods where there isn't a risk, but again, that's going to require extra documentation to prove that it's not only not intended to go to the Republic of Ireland, but not going to go. I don't even know how that's going to be done. I don't think the details have even sorted out. But what Boris Johnson's own government is talking about is they've already started to explain to Northern Irish businesses the form they're going to have to fill in to send goods from Northern Ireland to Great Britain. Well, that's the bit the EU don't care about. That's got nothing to do with the EU. They're not so bothered about goods leaving their territories. Generally speaking, regions are not bothered about goods leaving their borders unless they're part of some international agreement to stop certain things leaving it. They're more bothered about things coming in. Is it of the right standard? So the fact that Boris Johnson's own government is now explaining to Northern Irish businesses the form they're going to have to fill in is, despite the fact he's saying verbally to the papers in England, oh yeah, there's not going to be any checks. He's telling businesses in Northern Ireland, oh yeah, by the way, there's going to be checks. You're going to need this form. And this is the document that the British government is insisting on, not the EU. And it's apparently quite complex as well, in stark contrast to the promises made by the Brexit Secretary that it would be very straightforward. And the greater irony here is that it's not particularly Boris Johnson who wants this form to exist at all. So it has very little to do with him or his government other than they're implementing it. They're implementing it at the behest of the United States. As I say, it's not for goods travelling into the EU. It's for travelling into the UK, potentially from one part of the UK to another, but still. And it's because the United States demands it as part of their security protocols in the wake of 9/11. The same form will be required of any goods travelling from any part of Britain to the EU. It wasn't previously and isn't currently needed because you don't need that within the EU. But going from a third country to the EU, yeah, you do. Or from the EU to a third country. So there will need to be checks in that direction. There will obviously need to be checks in the other direction across the Irish Sea. I'll post a link in the description below to the legal document underpinning the need for those checks going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, which is very much to do with the EU. I will warn you, however, it is not designed to be understood by laymen, and I've only had a quick scan and I'm not interested myself, just that it exists. And this is what hauliers have been warning us about for some time. So the checks required are going to be extremely complex. The documentation required is going to be extremely complex. Small firms won't have the staff to do that. The staff they have don't have time to do that. They'd need to get in extra staff. They may not have the money for that. Their profit margins are not, exorbitant. They're not going to have the money. And even for those who are large enough to be able to employ staff to do that, it's going to massively increase their cost. They're going to have to employ more people. Costs that have to be passed on somewhere. I can't see any way in which this will not disrupt the balance of British to EU hauliers. That means potentially we're going to be relying more on EU-based hauliers, more on EU drivers who are likely to refuse certain jobs as well until systems have improved. They don't want to be stuck, for days on end at a border. But it'll also hit the EU hauliers as well, who themselves may not have the staff to all of us, when they used to be able to just drive along, all of a sudden have to fill in a complicated form to be able to get their goods across. So surely that's going to reduce the overall volume of road freight possible into and out of Great Britain, at least. And because we're not going to have enough capacity. Even if, let's say we sort the border problems out and we have enough staff to do the checks, which we don't, by the way, and we're not going to by the end of this year. But let's say they got on top of that somehow. The fact that the hauliers themselves don't have the time to fill in the documentation that's not going to help the situation. And, Johnson in particular has been dismissive of the needs for checks going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, when that is the direction that isn't really up to him at all. So, as I say, to help out the poor confused Prime Minister, the European Commission have very helpfully drawn him a map of where checks are going to be needed. As in to say, you need to put in checkpoints here, 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 and get some staff there so that they know what to do. Is that clear? And, as much as he might demand that checks don't need to take place, the fact is that the treaty he has just signed says it does, very clearly in there. This is the treaty that has now been implemented by Parliaments, the House of Commons and the House of Lords in this country. It is law and it's there for anyone to see for themselves. So deny if he must. The only people who will believe him are the ones who either can't or won't read the document for themselves. The document also makes it clear that the EU rules take precedence in that direction, and as such, the European Court of Justice will be the final arbiter in any disputes. We've signed up to that. And that's not something for the transition period, by the way. Remember, the withdrawal agreement isn't just about the transition period. It's also a permanent treaty. So until such time as we agree a treaty that replaces it, this is permanent. This goes beyond the transition period. The European Court of Justice is the final arbiter on anything leaving Great Britain into either the EU or even Northern Ireland, which is still part of the UK. And that's in there as well. We've signed up to that. And the way Johnson is carrying on, I am going to expect disputes. In fact, I'm actually considering that he may deliberately create the conditions for disputes on the basis that maintaining a them and us scenario will help him retain power, much as Trump has relied on in the United States. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, then please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.